How did the Nephilim survive the flood? Right? It seems like one of the chief purposes in God sending a global flood was to wipe out these humanoids, these demonic offspring, hybrid, half watcher, fallen angel, and half daughters of men, to wipe them off the face of the planet. It seems a little bit, careless on God's part to flood the whole earth, to kill all human beings and all creatures, all animals, but somehow miss the Nephilim. But we know that the Nephilim are on the earth after the flood. We see that in the book of Numbers. We see that in the conquest of Canaan, the bad report that's brought back by the 12 Hebrew spies. The Nephilim are among them. The giants are there in the land. So how did the Nephilim survive the flood? Or perhaps the better question is, how did they return if the flood was successful? These are the questions that we answer in today's episode of Theology Applied with my special guest, Dr. Tim Chaffey, who's written close to about a 500-page book on the subject. I'm Pastor Joel Webbin, and this is Right Response Ministries. Tune in now.
Applying God's Word to every aspect of life. This is Theology Applied.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Theology Applied. I'm privileged to have once again, this is part 2 now, Dr. Tim Chaffey joining us today. Thanks, Tim, for coming on the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Joel. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So if you're tuning into this and you did not watch part 1, you're welcome to stick with us, but you also can go back and check that out on our YouTube channel or on any podcast platform, iTunes or Spotify. But the first part, what we discussed is who are the Nephilim? Who are the Nephilim? How does this lead to the giants? These kinds of things, the fallen angels. And what we did was we went over the 3 most popular views: the Sethite view, what do you call it, Tim? The kingly view?
Yeah, the royalty view or divine king's view.
Got you. Okay, so the royalty view, and then the view that Tim and I hold, which is the fallen angel view. And so that's what we did. So who are the Nephilim? How did this come about? And now what we're going to do today is really focus, because some of the questions that we got in the YouTube comments were, okay, well, that's great. That explains the Nephilim in their origin in the first place. But it seems like God failed if we're not careful here. He sends a worldwide flood. And you guys are asserting, Dr. Chaffey is asserting, that one of the primary purposes of this flood is to not wipe out the Nephilim, but then it seems as though somehow they return, because you see in Numbers, with Joshua and Caleb and the spies sent out from Israel. And so did God fail? Did God, miss them somehow? So here's the question right out the gate that I want to throw at you, Dr. Chaffey. How did the Nephilim survive or return? Which one? How?
Okay. They didn't survive. So we know there were only 8 people who survived the flood. It's Noah, his wife, their 3 sons, and the 3 daughters-in-law. Peter tells us that as well. Only 8 souls survived the flood. So there were no Nephilim surviving the flood. Incidentally, the other views, especially the Sethite view, usually need to have one of the daughters-in-law carrying that genetic code through the flood. Right. I don't hold to that. I don't think that's accurate. The solution is that there was a second incursion, and that's, I think you get that in Genesis 6:4. So remember, Moses is writing this passage, and he's living long after the flood, and he is writing this at a time where they know there are Nephilim in the land. That's what we're told in Numbers 13. And so he says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, speaking about before the flood, Genesis 6:4, and also afterward. And the next word there in our Bible is so key, and very few of them get it right. The Hebrew word is asher. And if you look in our different Hebrew grammars, like Gesenius's grammar, and I think Walke's another one, they both say when this word is used in this way, it refers to an event that happened in the past and was repeated either at regular or irregular intervals. So in other words, it should be whenever, not when. And so most of our Bibles will say the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God did this activity, which makes it very ambiguous. Were the Nephilim already around when this was taking place? And who are they? We don't even know who the Nephilim are. Then the whole inclusion of them in the passage makes no sense. But if the word is understood as whenever, everything is clarified. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days before the flood, and also afterward, whenever the sons of God did this. So that tells us how the Nephilim got there. They're the result of these illicit unions, and it happened before the flood, and it also happened after the flood.
Very helpful. So these fallen angels, like I know the book of Enoch, which I think there are some things that are helpful, but it's not canon, it's not scripture. And so we, obviously read the book of Enoch with a grain of salt. But I do think that Christians are welcome to read, some of the apocrypha books that are not biblical, but you can look at these things, and you see Peter even kind of referencing, different biblical authors that kind of reference Enoch. Now, the book of Enoch, if I remember correctly, I think he gets very specific about there being 200 watchers, and we don't know if that's actually true or not. But my question is, these fallen angels, and just for the record, some people use the term watchers because I think that's what appears in the book of Enoch, and whether that's a proper classification for this particular angelic being or not, my understanding is that, what's trying to be conveyed in that instance is that there are God-facing angels and there are man-facing angels, and the man-facing angels are not inherently worldly, and carnal, but they're actually by God's design. That is their purpose. And so, like the book of Hebrews says, are not all angels ministering spirits to serve, to come alongside and minister to the sons of Abraham who are to inherit eternal life. And so there's this sense of there are angels like messenger angels, Gabriel, things like that. But then we also know there are seraphim and the four living creatures, with 6 wings, and the 24 elders that it seems as though their 24/7 purpose is to be Godward facing around the throne of God, paying him homage day and night. And so watchers, those angels who were facing man, looking towards man, of this classification of angels, if you want to use that rhetoric, and I would love to get your thoughts in just a moment on that. Enoch says that there are 200 of those, that it seems as though they initially fell from heaven, but it is not necessarily that all 200 of them engaged in this illicit union, forbidden union with the daughters of men, all at the same time, pre-flood, antediluvian. It could be entirely possible that the number is kind of irrelevant, but let's say, X many amount of angels chose to rebel against God, and the rebellion all happened at one time. So it's not multiple rebellions, angels falling from heaven, but of those angels that did fall from heaven, a sub-portion of those pre-flood, during the days of Noah, tried to create and successfully created this hybrid offspring. And then some other of these fallen angels did it again. Is that the way that we would communicate that? And what do you think about the watchers and Enoch? Help me out with the things I've said thus far.
All right, I'll see if I can keep all that straight.
I'm sorry. That's a lot of stuff.
Right. So the term watchers is used in Daniel 4 when you have Nebuchadnezzar's dream about the tree that's cut and everything. Talks about how a watcher came from heaven. So, this is the decree of the watchers that Nebuchadnezzar is going to be humbled. So that term does appear in Daniel, and then it is picked up in the intertestamental literature like Enoch. I don't think the book of Enoch was written by the antediluvian Enoch. I think it is a apocryphal intertestamental period book, and is, like you said, not scriptural. But yeah, Jude does quote from it, and he alludes to it multiple times. He clearly expected his audience to know it. He uses terminology like Enoch the seventh from Adam, which comes right from, using that terminology comes right from the book of Enoch. He even quotes it, verse 14 and 15 is a direct quote from the book of Enoch. It changes one word. I think it changes God to Lord or him to Lord, something like that, so that it is, by Jude's time, it's specifying that it's about Jesus, who's coming in judgment. So that's kind of an interesting tweak that Jude makes for his own purposes. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with using the term watchers, and I think that's helpful the way you described it. There are certain classes of angelic beings. They're not all the same, and I think that when we are with the Lord, I think we're going to be very surprised at the diversity of spiritual beings that are there, rather than just the cherub, the pictures we see of the little chubby kid floating around with Cupid's bow or something like that, or, just the traditional American view of angel. I think we're going to be shocked that they're quite diverse and have different capabilities, different abilities, different roles. And you outlined some of those. I think that was helpful. So with that, so you have, Enoch talks about 200. It names 20 of them that come together and under one named Semyaza, who have this pact that we're gonna, if we're really gonna rebel against God, if we're really gonna leave, our proper abode, essentially, then you have to swear that you're going to do this with these women. And so they make this pact to do it. Again, I think that's all speculative because it's from a non-canonical work. But whether or not it was the same angels who did it before and after the flood versus some of them did it, some of the sons of God did it before the flood, they're imprisoned, and then some of other ones did it after the flood. I think both are possibilities.
Right. I lean towards that latter view, but you're right. Both are possibilities. But that's been my understanding, is that, lots of angels fell, but not all of these fallen angels took the daughters of men and saw them as lovely and came into them. And so my thought is that they all rebelled against God, but some had the audacity to rebel even further, a subgroup of that initial swath of angels that fell from heaven. And those who actually, engaged in these illicit unions, their offspring, the Nephilim, were wiped out from the flood. And then those fallen angels themselves, the flood wouldn't wipe them out because, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think in Genesis, when it starts to talk about the flood, it says everything on earth that had breath in its lungs. Mm-hmm. And so the angels themselves, I feel like the Nephilim could not survive the flood, but their angelic fathers could. But it seems as though their fathers, the solution for that is that whether it be the Archangel Michael, that they were locked away in gloomy dungeons. But then that leaves the possibility that even with that view, that only a portion of these fallen angels, the ones who actually engaged in this illicit union, they're locked away in gloomy dungeons, but the other fallen angels are not wiped out in the flood because they're angelic beings. They're able to survive the flood. And so then they continue on the earth after the flood. And then again, another sub portion of them go back to this strategy of this illicit union and create the Nephilim again. And that could have even happened not just a second time after the flood, but even multiple times. Is that plausible?
Yeah, I think that's plausible. I tend to lean a little toward them being the same ones rather than different.
Tell me why.
Certainly. Jude and Peter, both in 1st and 2nd Peter, speak of these spirits who are in prison or spirits who are in chains of darkness till the great day, spirits who sinned in the days of Noah. And we know there's a certain group of angelic beings who are locked away until the day of judgment by the time Peter and Jude write. Not all of them, because obviously you got the demons running around if that's who they were, if they were fallen angels.
Right. I actually do want to get to that. Like if you agree with Heiser on the disembodied Nephilim spirits, but we can table that for a second.
So certainly not all the angels are held in chains of darkness. Certain ones who sinned in Noah's day were held. Now, were they confined there at the time of the flood? And that what you just alluded to. And I think that's certainly a plausible way to read that passage. I don't think that you could ever prove that wrong. I tend to think that it happened at the time of the crucifixion, resurrection, that time period. So in Psalm 82 is where you get God's pronouncement of judgment on these entities. So it tells us this is the divine council passage where God takes his stand in the divine council. He judges among the gods. And there he talks about how I said you are gods, yet you are going to fall like men, like one of the princes, or you're going to die like men, is what he says, and fall like any prince. So there in Psalm 82, they were supposed to be judging justly. That's what he tells them in verses 2 and 3. And then we read what they were doing. They were showing favoritism. They were oppressing the poor. They were doing all sorts of wicked things, and they weren't doing the job that they were tasked with. And then at the very end of the Psalm, verse 8 says, "Arise, O God, and judge the earth, for you shall inherit all nations." I think that's a reference to the judgment. And the first word there in that Psalm, and again, I'm not going to say this is a watertight argument that you can't refute it. But the very first word used there in the Septuagint is anastasis. It's arise, resurrect. So maybe it's a hint that is when this happened. So between the crucifixion and resurrection, Jesus descends to proclaim victory, perhaps. Whatever that proclamation is that he made, maybe it's to proclaim victory. Maybe at that time is when they're they're sentenced or confined. So I lean toward that, but I'm open to the other one as well. And what's interesting about that psalm is, well, there's a lot of interesting things. Jesus quotes from it in John 10, and that part about you are gods. And but when it says, "Arise, O God, and judge the earth, for you shall inherit all nations," that goes back to Deuteronomy 32:8, where Moses is telling the people in his kind of his farewell address to ask your fathers and they will tell you. And he starts talking about the Babel event, when God separated the nations according to a lot of our Bibles say sons of Israel, but the textual evidence that we have before us from the Dead Sea Scrolls, also the Septuagint, it's sons of God, the B'nai Elohim. So at Babel, he separated the nations according to the number of the sons of God. And so there were 70 nations at Babel that split out according to Genesis chapter 10. So I think rather than 200, I think 70 is probably more likely.
Wow, that's helpful.
And then right after that, it says, but Israel is God's inheritance, Jacob his allotted inheritance. So at that time at Babel, God says, you don't want me? I gave you a chance to start over after the flood, and you still reject me. Okay, now you're going to be under their control, these 70 rebellious beings.
So kind of God delegating them, and the devil kind of being the top dog, but him having his viceroys, or the 70 different fallen angels that are actually like princes and principalities, like a principality being like a province in Canada or a state in the United States. So that's an area, geographic area. But the princes are not the actual human kings, but the spirit, the fallen angel that is residing over that area. Like the Prince of Persia is speaking of
in Daniel 10, yeah.
So is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good way to think about it. And so they were given a certain region to rule over, and they, instead of leading their people in justice and righteousness, they lead their people into idolatry and all sorts of wickedness, and then God judges them. So at Deuteronomy 32, it's Israel is your allotted inheritance. At Psalm 82, once they're judged, and this is another reason why I think it's at the time of the crucifixion, resurrection, Pentecost, that time period, arise, O God, and judge the earth, for you shall inherit all nations. That's when the message then goes out to all nations. And so it's almost as if God sets up this little contest that tells these rebellious beings, you keep rebelling against me, fine, you can have all the people. I'm going to take one guy. And he's not even around yet, but I'm going to take this guy called Abraham, and I'm going to win. All of the stuff I said is going to come to pass is going to come to pass. And so
that's
we can't.
Awesome.
Yeah. And when you see the Old Testament in that light, suddenly so many passages start to become very, very clear that God is not just showing his power over Israel, which he does that, or over Egypt and the various nations, but he's also demonstrating his authority over the gods of those nations. Like Exodus 12:12 says, I will execute judgment on all the gods of Egypt. Well, each of the 10 plagues was a direct strike against one of the gods of Egypt, so that the Israelites would know Ra is not more powerful than Yahweh, and Hotep or all these other ones are not more powerful than Yahweh. Yahweh is the one true God, the God of heaven and earth.
Finally, a coffee company that doesn't hate you and your beliefs. Today's sponsor, Squirrelly Joe's Coffee, is a thoroughly Christian company that ships seriously good coffee straight to your front door. Owned and operated by Joe Morris and his family out of Olney, Illinois. They believe that Christians should be building a thoroughly Christian economy by doing business with other like-minded Christians. They also donate a portion of their proceeds to Operation Underground Railroad to help end child trafficking. Just go to squirrellyjoes.com and use promo code RRM for 20% off your purchase. Squirrelly Joe's Coffee, share coffee, serve humbly, live faithfully. Join Douglas Wilson, Dr. Joseph Boot, Brian Sauvé, Eric Kahn, and myself on March 1st, 2nd, and 3rd for our 2024 conference. It's called Blueprints for Christendom 2.0. Go and visit rightresponseconference.com to register today. We hope to see you at the conference in March. With that being said, though, in 10 plagues, the gods, plural, of Egypt, and then going back to that prince and principality and 70 total sons of God, fallen angels, did Egypt, did that particular geographic region, instead of getting one, did they get 10 or something like that? How do we think about that?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I wonder if there are the chief ones, maybe 70, and then there are underlings in a sense.
Gotcha.
So if you think of like the Greeks with the Olympian gods, in a sense they're equals, but Zeus is the head.
Right.
And then the Canaanites have this very similar thing with El and Baal as so this pantheon of gods, but there's still this one chief one who's over them. And I think Egypt had something similar to that. I think the Sumerians had something similar to that. And so a lot of these early cultures seem to have something.
I think the Philistines also, with like Dagon, I think he was more significant than all the other gods in the pantheon, like where, and that's the top dog that falls over when the ark is brought in. It's like they find him and he's toppled over, his hands, are broken off. And
well, the first time he's just fallen over. Then they put him back up. The second time the guy's like, let's make sure you get this.
Right.
It wasn't just, he wasn't just misplaced.
Let me make the illustration a little bit more on the nose.
Right. So. And that's another great example where God's showing his power over the gods of the people. And that the Philistines got it at that point. They always referred to the ark as the ark of the God of Israel. And so it helps you understand, once you understand that mindset, it helps you understand why the Israelites kept falling into idolatry. We look back at that and think, you guys are so stupid. The God that brought you out of Egypt and part of the Red Sea and did all these amazing things, why are you turning to these other gods? Well, because they viewed the land as being attached to the deity. And so if the Philistines were threatening them or were overpowering them, then their God must be more powerful. So worship the more powerful God. It's why when I think Ezekiel talks about, like, perhaps we can beat them on the plains. Their gods are the gods of the mountains, or I might have it backwards, but not Ezekiel, but that is with is it Ben Hadad or the Arameans?
Oh, I think it's in 1st or 2nd Kings.
Yes,
that's right.
Yep. He uses that example. It was like, oh yeah, their God's a God of valleys. If we met them on the plains, or vice versa, then no, God's the God of heaven and earth and all things.
But what you're saying is that so God, Yahweh, the one true triune God, He is God of all. But it wasn't stupidity as the way we as moderns would read it in terms of lesser gods fallen. Like there actually were other gods, lowercase g gods. And they did have geographic jurisdictions. So the concept of there being a mountain god or a valley god is not only is it not stupid, it was probably true.
Yeah, and so you have the passage with Naaman the Syrian. What is that? 2 Kings 5, I think, where this leprous guy, a military guy, who comes to Elisha to be healed.
Right.
And then he gets upset that Elisha just says, oh, yeah, go dip in the Jordan sometime. And he's like, we got better rivers where I'm from.
Right.
But then he does it, and he's cured. And he tries to give Elisha, clothes and all sorts of stuff, and Elisha doesn't take it. But then he asks for one other thing. He asks for 2 mule loads of dirt so that he could bring back. Why would he do that? Well, I think it's because he believed that the one true God, Yahweh, the one that cured him, could be worshipped if he brings that dirt back to his land. And then he worships on that.
Yahweh is like all the other gods, is a jurisdictional God. That's, and so it's like, he belongs to this land. And and there is something to be said, not in as it regards the God of heaven and earth, because he's God of all the land. It's all his, cattle on not just one hill, but 1,000. But as it pertains to other gods, there is something that seems like to be said. Even the instance of like there's something significant about the land itself, that when God hands people over to judgment, especially in the Old Testament, other nations, but even Israel itself, he says, if you live in this land the way that, that everybody else did, right? There's 2 things. God is doing 2 things simultaneously. Yes, it is about blessing Israel, fulfilling his good promises for his people. But it's not just blessing Israel that they might inherit the land. But it's also in God's justice, 400 years of iniquity having been filled up, as God spoke previously to Abraham, that God is, in one instance, he is blessing Israel. In the other, he is justly judging the prior inhabitants of the land for their pagan idolatry, their breaching of the first table of the law of God in regards to idolatry, but then also their breach of the second in regards to the violence in their hands and human sacrifice and theft and all these different things. And so, and of course, sexual immorality. And so all that being said, God essentially then turns to Israel once they've inherited the land and says, don't get cocky and think that the land spewed these guys out. And I used you as my rod to do it, my instrument to bring judgment. But don't think that it's that what's peculiar is inherent to you. If you live like them, this land will spew you out. And it makes me think, God doesn't just say, I'll punish you, but the land will actually turn on you. So one, I think, it's important for us to remember that the earth, the creation, the creation's allegiance is with its creator. The land is on God's side, right? The rocks will cry out, if people won't worship. The land is on God's side. It makes me think of Chronicles of Narnia. Even the trees, some of the trees are on her side. Speaking of the White Witch, the creation itself has allegiances. But then also it makes me think the land will spew out because if you dishonor the Lord, he would abandon, and some of these other false gods would come back. There would be a return of these false gods. And that makes me think of what Jesus even said about spirits. And this gets into, are they disembodied Nephilim spirits or are they actual watchers, fallen angels? But this idea of when an evil spirit is cast out, it goes through arid places, waterless places, but it doesn't go to the abode. Not yet. It doesn't go to the lake of fire or final judgment, but it goes through, it seems like the earth, waterless places here in this created physical cosmos. But eventually, if the house is swept clean and put in order, but it's not filled, and then it'll come back with 7 other, demons far worse than itself, and the final state of the man will be far worse than the former. And it makes me think of not just at an individual level, but at a corporate and regional level, as it pertains to nations and cultures. Is it possible that a land could, a people, culturally, corporately, could worship Yahweh? But then later on turn in their hearts and abandon him. And then in a sense, in their embrace of Yahweh, especially in the Old Testament, before some of the binding and things that Jesus did, we referenced earlier with his death, descent, and resurrection. But pre-Christ, is it possible that a land could worship Yahweh, thinking of like Nineveh, for instance, but then reject him later and actually have some of those old territorial fallen angel gods return, and perhaps even return with some of their friends, and I don't know, are those things within the realm of biblical possibility?
Yeah, I think so. Whether they team up or one, you have the Prince of Greece and the Prince of Persia, they're fighting each other, so it's not as if they're always completely on the same side fighting against Yahweh. They're sinful, prideful as well, and maybe that gets the best of them, like it does for us.
Right.
And so it could be that certain ones are conquering, subjecting other ones, and then they're serving them. But I think everything you just talked about with the land casting them out, or that even the animals would turn against them. It talks about. So that was one of the. In fact, that's the reason, essentially, why Israel went into exile for 70 years, because for 490 years, they didn't give the land its Sabbath rest like they were supposed to do every 7 years. And Jeremiah 25:11 said, that's why you're going for 70 years. And
they had to do all those Sabbaths at once.
Yep.
Retroactive Sabbath, yeah.
The land was going to get its rest. And Israel used to be a land flowing with milk and honey. And so it was a very rich land, but by the time of Jesus, it's very arid and dry and not as prosperous as it once was. And I think that has a lot to do with the way that the Israelites did not follow God's commands fully, and
they rebelled.
That was the result.
Right, and by the time Jesus comes on the scene, I mean, he comes to Israel has multiple periods of stiff-necked rebellion against God. But it seems as though Jesus comes to a particularly rebellious generation, that he came to his own, they received him not. And so by the time Jesus arrives on the scene, one of the things, and this gets to the question that we kind of set up earlier, but one of the things that I find interesting is Jesus comes to Israel, and it seems like part of the lion's share of his ministry is going around casting demons out left and right. Israel is just filled with demons. It seems like just filled to the brim with demons. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think it's because by the time you get to that particular generation, there's been so much hard-heartedness and rebellion, not to mention 400 years leading up to it. The skies were as bronze. The word of the Lord was very rare in those days, from Malachi to the time of Christ, John the Baptist as a forerunner. And so you've got very little special revelation from the Lord. Not that he's being stingy. He already has provided through the scrolls and through prior prophets everything that Israel would need. He's provided sufficient special revelation. Of course, you also have natural revelation, but there is, there's no new word of the Lord. For 400 years, Israel is becoming darkened in their heart more and more and more. Jesus comes on the scene, and Israel as a nation and that particular land seems to be infested with demonic spirits. Coincidence? I think not. So what are these demonic spirits? What do you think about that?
Yeah, so the two primary views are, one, they're just fallen angels. I think that's kind of the default view for most Christians. We hear Jesus talk about the devil and his angels, and then you have these evil spirits or demons that are being cast out, and so we just make that connection, and we think that that's who they are. The other view, and one that's popular among those who hold the fallen angel view, is that the evil spirits that are being cast out are the disembodied spirits of Nephilim who were killed in the flood, and or the following years as Israelites are taking the land, and Nephilim are there and killed. And so that might be hinted at the passage you alluded to when Jesus talks about how when a demon is cast out, it goes about in arid places.
Right.
Why arid places? It's just wilderness. Is that all, or is he making a stronger point that they don't like water because it reminds them of the flood? And so sometimes people who hold that view will use that passage as a evidence for that position. I've got a chapter that kind of explores the four primary arguments used for that position, that the evil spirits are the departed spirits of the Nephilim. I'm open to it. I probably lean about 65-70% to the more traditional understanding that the evil spirits are just rebellious angels and not necessarily the departed spirits. But I could see either one being accurate. Okay.
And then whether it be disembodied spirits of the Nephilim or fallen angels themselves, in either case, it seems like they are desperate for a host. So I think of, when Jesus encounters a particular demoniac, and he says, son of God, son of man, have you come to judge us before the appointed time? And then pleads with Jesus not to send him into just a bodiless existent arid places, but into the pigs. And Jesus grants the request. What do you think is going on there? To me, that seems, in some sense, to back up be another example, just like arid places, waterless places, thinking flood, Nephilim died in the flood. This likewise seems to be like Nephilim, if it is disembodied Nephilim spirits that they desperately want to not be disembodied and to be bodied, and they prefer, a human being created in the image of God closer to their original existence. But if not, they'll take a pig over nothing.
Yeah, I think that's plausible, but a couple of reasons I think it's not maybe the best argument. One, they immediately run down into the water.
All right.
So if they don't like water, why would they direct the pigs to run right down in the water? I think maybe what's going on there is they're trying to make Jesus' ministry more difficult. Not that Jesus wouldn't have known this, but if suddenly a farmer in the area loses 2,000 pigs, he's losing his livelihood, and he's going to be very upset and tell his neighbors, this guy came over here and ruined
he's a
my
troublemaker.
Farm.
Gotcha.
Now he's living in that's in the Decapolis, so that's more of a Greek area. So I don't think this guy was a Jewish farmer who was not allowed to have pigs like that. So it's probably more of a Greek, but so maybe that's what's going on there, is the demons are trying to be clever that, hey, don't just cast us out. Let us go into these things. And then their ulterior motive is, let's destroy this guy's livelihood. So then
Jesus gets kicked out of the town, which it seems like they were successful in that. That actually makes a lot of sense. Okay. So here's kind of a question that I'd love to get to towards the end of the episode is where. So my understanding, I have more of an older view of in terms of a descent. So like our church is fairly liturgical, and we recite the Apostles' Creed in our Lord's Day worship gatherings. However, Catholic it's a fine word, but just because people are unused to that, we say invisible and universal church. And then the only other tweak that we have is Hades, which some older ones actually say Hades instead of hell in regards to the descent. So my understanding is that Jesus descended in the spirit to the realm of the dead, into the belly of the earth. And in that place, he's not going to hell per se, but he's going to Hades, the realm of the dead, and that he's in the spirit on the side of Abraham's bosom, the side of paradise. And he is announcing victory to his own, and then ransoms them. And now the way has been paved by his death and atonement. So it ransoms them to heaven. But he also is kind of, per his parable, the rich man and Lazarus, the beggar, proclaiming across that chasm to the damned in a place of torment, and even arguably a third section of the realm of the dead, where there are not just people who are damned, but they're actually spirits, angels, that some of those watchers who have been locked in gloomy dungeons. And he's, in a sanctified, divine way, proclaiming a sermon, titled Nanny, Nanny, Boo Boo. And so that's kind of like, that's been my understanding of the descent. And then he breaks captives free, and ransoms Abraham and all Old Testament saints now coming with him, and brings them into their heavenly abode with God. And that now, as it currently sits in this gospel age, post the incarnation of Christ and his life, death, resurrection, and ascension, that we do not yet have the lake of fire, but we still do have the damned in Hades, in a place of torment. Abraham's bosom has been emptied. Perhaps maybe some excavating, renovation, making more room for future, damned over these last 2,000 years. And then those watchers that were imprisoned are still imprisoned. But the other watchers, my question would be, where are they today? Where are these other fallen angels today? If Jesus has, because it does seem as though, now for me, I'm post-millennial, we've talked about, so I think that the strong man, right, you can't plunder the house unless you first go in and bind the strong man. So I take that to mean that Satan is bound. That doesn't mean that he doesn't still prowl around, that he has no influence whatsoever, but that his leash has been shortened. And to such a degree that if nothing else, he's no longer able to corporately wholesale deceive the nations to the extent that he previously was able to do. And so we see swaths of Gentiles coming to faith in Jesus Christ in this gospel age. And so with that particularly pertains to Satan. But if he does have these sous chefs or viceroys that he's appointed, all over in regional places, it seems like there has been some binding of them as well. Are they now in Hades, joining those other watchers, or are they still at large today? What do you think about fallen angels today in the year of our Lord 2023? Where are they?
Yeah, so coming from more of a premillennial perspective, I would look at the binding of Satan and as being a future thing prior to the millennium starting.
Right.
But I don't think that you and I have to disagree on some of the other things that we're talking about here. So I think there are still angels at large, if you will. So when Satan is called the god of this world, or he goes around like a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour, I do think he's active. I do think that his ministers are active, which I know you're not saying that he's inactive. Right. I know that. I don't mean to mischaracterize your view. So I do think they're still active and trying to deceive, and I just think that the gospel is the power of God unto salvation to those who believe, for those who believe, first to the Jew, then to the Gentile. And with the Holy Spirit empowered message going out throughout the world, I think you're seeing people come to faith even in the midst of spiritual darkness that is and spiritual oppression from these fallen angels. So
where are they? Your answer would be that here. They're still here.
Yeah, some are still active. And let me confirm the other things you were saying, though, as far as the view of Hades and, that the Abraham's bosom being emptied. I think that's all seems pretty reasonable, pretty, I don't want to say straightforward because there's not a lot about it in Scripture, but it seems to be what Scripture is teaching there. And yes, you have Hades, and it was interesting that you said that you changed that word in the creed. I just spoke at a church on Sunday morning that did the exact same thing. Rather than descending into hell, it's descending into Hades. And they read that. But the certain ones, 1 Peter 3:18 through 20, talks about how there were spirits who, let me just read it so I don't misstate it here. For Christ also suffered once for sins, the just for the unjust, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive by the Spirit, by whom also he went and preached to the spirits in prison, who formerly were disobedient when once the divine long-suffering waited in the days of Noah while the ark was being prepared. So during Noah's day, these spirits were disobedient. Now they're held in chains. And so that would be a reference to the specific fallen angels that
but not all of them, like we talked about earlier.
Right. Yep, absolutely. And so it's interesting when you look at how people who hold the Sethite view take that passage. They have to do all sorts of strange hermeneutical gymnastics to make that about Jesus preaching through Noah to the sinful people of his day, but that's not what it says.
Right. Yep. I remember I held that view once upon a time, and I remember getting to that text in Peter and preaching it that way. And it was tough. I definitely struggled with it. I can't remember. I know it was Augustine's view, right? It was Augustine's view, the Sethite view.
Oh yeah, Augustine's Sethite view, yeah.
Right, and then Clement of Alexander. Do you remember what his view was?
Clement is a fallen angel guy.
That's right. Okay. Yep. But pretty much everybody was a fallen angel guy, it seems, or at least the vast majority, up until about 400, 500 AD?
Yeah, there was a guy in the 3rd century who promoted more of the royalty view within the church.
Okay.
That came in among rabbis around 90 AD, the royalty view, and then the Sethite view came on sometime in the 300s, and then once Augustine adopted that, it kind of became the view of the church.
He is Augustine after all. So it does make a little bit of sense. And then, Augustine, straight line from him all the way to, one of those exceedingly rare L's from John Calvin, my boy John Calvin, who he usually puts up W's, but in this case, Calvin goes with Augustine. And
it's weird. Calvin, all he did was he was grossed out by the fallen angel view. He just said it's refuted by its own absurdity. That's all he said.
He makes no argument. None whatsoever. It's ad hominem or.
But what's really weird? Yeah. And Luther was
this is dumb, so I'm not going to address it.
Yeah, Luther was similar, and so was Augustine. And what was really weird about both of them, they both believed that demonic spirits came in the night and molested women. And so they even talked about that there are many reputable people who believe this. I think Augustine referred to them as Sylvans and Fauns that were doing that.
What was the first word?
A Sylvan.
Sylvan. So what is a Sylvan?
So Sylvan, like a wood nymph or something in the woods. So gotcha. Transylvania is like across the woods.
Gotcha.
So that's where that word comes from. So a Sylvan and a Faun, those were demonic spirits from Augustine's time. And then Luther speaks of like the incubus and the succubus, which is the same sort of thing where a demonic spirit would sexually assault women or men in the middle of the evening.
Like Lilith, would she be an example?
Perhaps. There's a lot, it depends on your view. Lilith, there's a lot of mythology attached to her.
For sure.
But certainly not from Scripture in terms of being Adam's first wife. That's not biblical.
Not yet. No way.
Not at all. But it was weird. They both accepted that, but then the whole fallen angel view, that's absurd.
Yeah, that is super weird. It's like, we'll really talk about fairies and dryads and, but this thing that seems to be black and white in Scripture, that's silly because Augustine said so.
Right.
Our sponsors, Private Family Banking Partners, is on a mission to help Christians live out the Dominion mandate by making a stealth-like move away from the mainstream banks and into their own privatized banking system. This innovative system is designed to guarantee uninterrupted compound interest and tax-free growth without exposure to typical stock market risks. To join this growing community that is already building wealth unto future generations and converting post-mill talk into post-mill action, contact Private Family Banking Partner Chuck DeLauderante at his email, chuck@privatefamilybanking.com. That's chuck@privatefamilybanking.com. Set up an appointment and receive a free copy of Chuck's new book, Protect Your Money Now: How to Build Multi-Generational Wealth Outside of Wall Street and Avoid the Coming Banking Meltdown. Go to the links in the show notes below. Are you a small business owner and desire to defer a larger amount of your business income? Find out how to defer more income taxes, in some cases up to 10 times more than you can with your current 401k plan or other retirement plans. Are you trying to acquire or sell a business but getting enough cash together for the transaction is the sticking point to closing the deal? Then please contact our sponsor, Defined Benefit Partners. They will provide a free analysis of what may be possible for your business or the business that you want to buy or sell. See their contact information in the show notes below. Okay, well, let's go ahead and very last question is, we said, where are the Watchers still today? And we're saying some of them locked up in gloomy dungeons, and then some of these fallen angels, demons, are alive and well still to this day. And depending on your eschatology, you might say that, that they've dialed back because of the finished work of Christ. But in either instance, we still believe that there is demonic influence. Certainly, there's still demonic influence to this day. My position is that I think as the gospel has gone forth, that you still have exactly what God was doing in Egypt, except now we have it globally, that God is, he is humiliating all the false gods in the same way that Jesus, through his death and resurrection, that he put the spirits to open shame. He embarrassed them and still is doing so as the head of the church through his church, his body, here on earth. And I think that there are geographic implications for that demons actually are cast out and go through arid places and leave geographic regions as they've been Christianized. And I think the West might be, we'll see what God does in his sovereign plan, but the West might be one of the first corporate examples of a place that has been swept clean and put in order by the work of the gospel in arguably 500 to, if you go all the way back to King Alfred, 1,000 years of Christendom. The house swept clean and put in order. Certainly there are bugs along with the features, not saying that Christendom has been perfect, but in many regards, the West has been a Christianized place. And if we turn from God, much like Israel, not only is the possibility of demonic activity increasing and being on the rise, as you might currently find in very non-Christianized places of the world today, but you might actually find a demonic activity of which is 7 times worse than the prior. That there was a time where white guys, before the gospel came, were painting their faces blue and hopping on ships and raping and pillaging, people all over the world. That it's not skin pigment, it's not anything inherent to one ethnicity or one nationality, but it's the gospel that changes not even just individuals, but cultures and countries. And God has mercifully done this here in a way that he has not done to the same degree recently in history in other places, but it seems like other places are on the rise in terms of obedience towards God and revival and these kinds of things. Zambia has adopted, a distinctly Christian preamble to their constitution. Uganda is passing laws that are distinctly Christian, and the West is still doubling down on our rebellion against Christ. Even as we see the immediate consequences for our rebellion, things keep getting worse. And so all that being said, whether you're post-mill or pre-mill, even from my perspective with my eschatology, demons are still alive and well, fallen angels. And as the gospel goes forward, I think they're pushed back. But I think, just like if you're pre-mill, you're going to say overall the trajectory is down, but there can be some spikes along the way. And if you're post-mill, you're going to say overall the trajectory is up, but there can be some big dips. And I think the West is in a pretty big dip right now. And with those dips of Christendom or whatever you want to call it, the success of the Great Commission, which involves not only evangelism, but teaching obedience to Christ's commands, as we see dips and rejection of the Christian worldview, I think we not only see bad policies and bad legislation, but we see the rise of demonic activity. So fallen angels alive and well today, regardless of your eschatological view, they may be hindered within the post-millennial framework, but they're still there and we shouldn't get cocky. What about the disembodied Nephilim spirits? That's my final question for today's episode. Where are they? Are they in Hades? Why did some guys like Heiser think that they wouldn't go to hell? But that they would actually be floating around in the ether here on earth? And if so, are they still doing that right now?
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. And I kind of smiled as you were describing the West maybe being demon free. And I was thinking, you got probably one guy from a deliverance ministry thinking, yeah, it's hard.
We did it. We did it.
Going charismatic on us.
Right. Yeah. He's like, we did that. We locked ourselves for 40 days, fasted in a closet and prayed and named these regional powers. And I'm like, no, I think I would like to give Constantine a little bit more credit than you. But anyways.
Yeah. So going back to sorry about that, but the question that you had asked, I'm looking up a verse here. Let's see. Where are the departed spirits now? And why did Heiser and others think that they were these evil spirits? So I think the logic goes like this: if they are if their parentage is angelic and human, they're not fully one or the other. Therefore, when they die, they can't go to heaven and be with the Lord. They can't also go to hell, which that doesn't make any sense to me. I would think that if they repented, if they repented, they would be with the Lord. If they lived wickedly, that's all we ever see from them, as far as we know, they would be in Hades with the rest of them until that day of judgment. But so I never understood that logic behind that. But you do have passages, and this is really interesting, where the word Rephaim is used in the historical books. So it's you see Goliath is called the Rapha, so singular Rephaim. It just means giants. The Rephaim is giants. Rapha is giant. And Og was the last of the Rephaim, is what in that area is what he's called. So these,
I've seen some real quick. I've seen some people translate it healer. Is there any merit to that?
Translated as what?
Healer.
Oh, I wonder if that comes from Book of Enoch and from Jubilees, where it talks about how the Watchers taught the women like various things having to do with cutting of roots and with makeup and that kind of thing. I wonder if that comes with the healer
probably. Anyways,
but yeah, so the word Rapha or Rephaim is giants. But if you look in our lexicons, every time it's used in the prophetic books, and I think I'm probably going to get the wrong chapter, but I think Ezekiel 29 or maybe it's 32 has several references to that. And I think also you have, it might be Isaiah 14. It's used as a taunt against the people who are proud and lifted up. So like the one who shook the nations is going to be brought down. In fact, you're going to go down to the grave, to Sheol, where the Rephaim are. And so it's almost like you think you're big stuff here on earth, and you think you're setting your throne above the stars of God, that kind of thing. But you're going to be brought low. And by the way, you're going to go to the place where, remember these guys, the Rephaim? That's where they are now. And so I think you have statements in the prophets telling us that the departed spirits of those Nephilim, of the giants, are actually in the grave, in Sheol, in Hades, so to speak. So I think that's probably right. And it's interesting that when you look at the lexicons, they have Rephaim under two different entries, but it's spelled exactly the same. And yet they separate them out. They all do it. And in the historical books, it's referring to the physical giants here on earth. And then in the prophets, it's referring to I think it's translated as shades in certain translations. So these spirits of those giants who are awaiting the wicked people upon death, almost as a way to scare them even more. Like, you're going to be where these guys are.
Wow. Okay. So to summarize that, we're saying that the disembodied Nephilim spirits actually are in hell. Just like if it was a person who died in rebellion against God apart from saving faith in Christ is in hell.
That's what I leaned to. Remember before I said I was like 65,
right. Yeah,
35.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then so at least leaning towards that view. And then in terms of demonic activity, these are fallen angels. And we're not saying that 200 exactly fell. We're also not saying 70, but perhaps with 70 different regions, dispersions from Babel, that there were 70 heads, but each could have had a plethora of underlings. And so it's entirely possible that 10,000 angels fell from heaven, or 1,000,000 angels fell from heaven. And there's Lucifer, and he's got then 70 different, honchos, head honchos, his right hand men, so to speak. And then they've each got tons of people. And then they sometimes are at war with one another, but ultimately they're at war with the race of men. And that today, some of them have been locked in gloomy dungeons because of this unholy union, but that the vast majority of them are still in the earth, and that there might be, if there are 70, head honchos, and then lower, then there also might be classifications of, some demons being greater or stronger than others, and and then at the same time, like perhaps even especially, pre-Christ. Perhaps even some of the distinctions between various nationalities and cultures comes from these regional princes, fallen angels that are even, perhaps, have, that if there is diversity, back to the real early in the episode, if there is diversity among angelic beings, and God it seems as though that's what he's done in heaven, well, then of those who fell, they probably weren't all clones of one another. There was probably diversity among fallen angels, diversity of abilities and inclinations, and even diversity of knowledge. And so the idea that certain of these 70 head honchos that are now delegated over regions, that they would teach the people who lived in that region, emphasizing certain knowledge and certain skills, so that Egypt becomes a superpower in this way, or Persia becomes, in that way, that all those things seem as though they're true, or at least plausible, and that those fallen angels are still alive today, even if they've been restrained, depending on your eschatology, but still alive to this day, and that it is still entirely possible for not a Christian, but somebody who is in rebellion against God to be oppressed significantly or even possessed by demonic powers today.
Yeah, I appreciate that you talked about that diversity of ability again, because that's one question that people have all the time about the fallen angel people. How come they're not doing it anymore today? Well, it could just be that the ones who were capable of doing that are all locked up. And they can't do it anymore. Or even if there are some that aren't locked up, they're like, yeah, I saw what happened to my buddies. I'm not doing that.
Right.
It's not worth it. I want to run around as much as I can before it's too late. And so the other ones who are still around maybe are not capable. Maybe that's what was going on in the medieval period with the Sylvans and Fauns and the incubus and succubus. Maybe they're trying to figure it out. I don't know. It's a strange. This is a weird thing I discovered during my research. King James, that the King James Bible named after, wrote about a 100-page book on this topic about how the evil spirits could have done that, and it's really gross. That was the worst chapter to write, was going through and talking about this whole issue, whether or not it was still going on. And what I usually say, I don't remember if we got into this in the last episode, but why aren't they doing it today? Well, one, maybe they're not capable, but two, what's the point? Back then you win battles by having the biggest and the strongest. And so if you can create giants, that's going to help, right?
Right.
But today, it's more about technological prowess. It's intelligence, strategy. I don't care if you got giants. We can launch a cruise missile from 1,000 miles away and take them out. So they're not going to really help in a modern battle that way.
That's a great explanation. And then, of course, also the Messiah has come. So that if there was, the motivation of corrupting the Messianic line, well, too late. And then, so a lot of the motivation. And then, like you already said, also maybe the fear of, well, my buddy did that, 1,500 years ago, and he's been in a dungeon ever since. So and I'd like to have some free reign. So all that makes a lot of sense. So just for the listener, what we're going to do is the goal is that this would be a 4-part series. And so again, go back and check out episode 1 if you haven't watched that already. That's where we talk about who the Nephilim are and their origins, where they come from. Today, we really focused on how they returned, and we dispelled the myth of them surviving the flood on rafts, or Og, king of Bashan, hanging on to the ark, and Noah's feeding him, to satiate him. So we dispelled that in terms of survival, but that they did in fact return. So we talked about that, and then next episode, Lord willing, that'll be part 3. We're going to focus on going from the Nephilim to their descendants and talking about giants and talking about different classifications of giants and those kinds of things. And then the goal is that our final fourth episode would be a catch-all episode. So in the comments, give us your questions, and we'll do our best to address some of those questions. For instance, one of them that Dr. Chaffey addresses in his book that would be great for the fourth episode is, are demonic spirits oppressing women in a unique way still to this day? I think that's one of your appendices. Is that right, Dr. Chaffey?
Yeah, about whether or not that's still going on today. It kind of gets into the stuff we were talking about with the incubus and succubus.
Right.
And
so we can get into that. So next week is, to make it simple, next week is giants, and then fourth week is whatever you guys ask us. So thank you so much, Dr. Chaffey, for coming on the show again. Really appreciate it.
Joel, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.